Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Shelley Frost and Linda Young, all the way from California. Normally, ladies, I just interview people in Hong Kong, but I have accepted your request for an interview for Hong Kong Confidential because Linda is a victim of a romance scam and Shelley has written a book about it called Her King, the Con. And I just wanted to help get your message out as a fellow author and victim of a romance scam. I really wanted to help share your story and help promote your book. And hopefully we can help others not to get caught in the same trap that we were, Linda, as well.
Yeah.
So we can start with you, Linda, and you can just tell me a bit about your scam story. What happened?
I was divorced after 26 years, one marriage, and we divorced when my kids were adults. So it was a very amicable divorce. We knew that, the time had come for the end of the marriage. And so he went his way and I went my way. That being said, I thought that looking back now, I realized that emotionally, I hadn't really processed through the divorce and the grief and the end and, any of that. And so I was also in a really, really intense job with a lot of responsibility. I thought that I would be ready to go for, the dating sites. And my sister-in-law, who is my dearest friend, was having some success on the dating sites. And so I thought, okay, I'm ready for that now. I want to meet that man I've been waiting for my whole life. So I did, and I had heard from a few people, it takes time. You have to kind of work hard, almost like a part-time job, to find your person. And so that's what I did. So I went onto the dating sites and turned up that I met this person online. And actually, I had met a couple of people online even before I met the person who ultimately scammed me. In all of those situations, or many of the situations, I was asked for money. And at that point I said, forget it. No, goodbye. So I was really rational. Like I felt like I knew what I was doing. I was educated. I'm never going to give anybody money, who was asking me this that I haven't met before, the whole thing. And so a little bit of time went on. I met this particular person who scammed me. We started communicating. It was lovely. Everything that he said had been more than I could have ever hoped for in a man, in a possible romance, in a possible life together. And we had been talking back and forth, emailing and texting. And of course, he said he had to go out of the country on a business trip. And so he did. And then the next time that we started talking, he was in the location, which what he was telling me was Cuba. And he was there and everything was going really well. And it was at that point that he asked me to send him some cell phones. And it was at that point I said, absolutely not. And I stopped communicating with him. But I could not get him out of my mind. Of course, everything that he told me, like I said, was like a dream come true. And, I kept reverting back to, but what if, but what if, but what if? I stayed the course. A couple of weeks went by. I was lonely. I was by myself in my house, sad. And I was just kind of going through my emails and I found an email that he had sent me since then. Where are you? How could you just disappear on me like this? The holding my heartstrings, like, big time. And so I took a risk and I communicated back, and it was very emotional, conversations of how could you do that? You know how much I care about you, on his end to me, in other words. And so we started to communicate again. Well, it was after that I had thrown in, the towel at that point, saying that, okay, I'm all in. If I'm going to communicate with this guy, even though I already told him I wasn't, and I wasn't going to send him anything. And now I've kind of instated that. And yes, he's still there. He hasn't blown me off for somebody else. So he must be genuine. And so we began our conversations, and it just took off from there.
Shelley, when did you first hear about this romance, and when were the red flags raised for you, for your sister?
Well, I knew about another so-called relationship that she had had online with a guy who said he was in Malaysia. And then he asked her for $5,000 and she immediately dumped him. And we laughed and laughed about it. So that was my first awareness that these scams are real, and they came into my orbit at that time. Then she started talking to this other guy. And I asked her, I said, have you checked him out? Did you do a Google search on him? She's like, oh, sure, I did. Of course I did. Don't even worry about it. And that, of course, I'm going to believe my sister. I'm not going to question her integrity. So that made me feel better. A few weeks later, we went to a wedding where all of our girlfriends were together. And then my sister was getting the 9th degree from all of them about it. And it kind of made me nervous. Like, whoa, was I not paying close enough attention? They seemed very concerned. And the reason they were concerned was because they had never FaceTimed. My sister and the guy had never seen each other eye to eye. They've talked on the phone, they texted, they emailed, but there was not one time when they had actually looked at each other. And at this point in September, they were telling each other how much they loved each other. And that, again, in my mind, how can my sister be in love with someone who she's never even looked in their eyes? So that was the big red flag. At that point, one of those girlfriends said, Shelley, you really need to get on this. You need to investigate it. We need to find out what's going on here. Linda's at risk, and we can't let anything happen to her. So that's when we launched the investigation. That's all detailed in the book.
Shelley, did you speak to Linda about this investigation, or did you kind of do it surreptitiously without her being aware?
Surreptitiously without her being aware.
And by this point, Linda, had you given money to your scammer? How did the exchange of money come about? Tell me about that.
Well, yeah, I'd given him quite a bit of money. And so being with our girlfriends and everything, I was feeling a lot of anxiety and shame, but then battling that down because I was building our future, this man in my future, and it was going to be wonderful. And they were all going to fall in love with him like I did. And I was going to be able to say, see, I told you guys all along, it was fine. And now we have this beautiful life together. It did start with asking for some cell phones, which I did, went and bought the cell phones and sent them. And he basically came from the standpoint of being in Cuba, being that it's a third world country. You have to know who you know that you can get any business done. And so he was there buying property, right? And Cuba was starting to open up. And because he was from South Africa, which he told me he had dual citizenship. And so it made things a lot easier. But with things like cell phones, it was really difficult to get them, since he was in Cuba. So it was a lot easier if I could send them to him. And then he would hand them out basically as like gifts or bribes, whatever you want to call it, to the powers that be that could give him access to land grants and, purchasing land and whatever needed to be done. And I did do the research on that, and I did read about dual citizenship and everything. And it was enough information for me to continue to think, well, maybe this really is, in the back of my mind, even though the back of my mind was always wary and leery, but I wanted this to be true. I wanted this so much that I pushed those hesitations back and I pushed down those worries. So for anybody that's out there, yes, I bought them the cell phones. It was a different address that I sent them to every single time. Usually the addresses were all in New York, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn. And then after that, it started to get into, okay, the cell phones are great, but now we need cash because I've got to purchase these properties, taking advances on credit cards. I've never done that before, but he's kept reassuring me and he would say, you've never done that before? Oh my gosh. Well, you've never been involved with, large dollar amounts and large, transactional amounts. I'm like, no, I really haven't. He says, oh, well, it is not a big deal. So, let's go ahead and do this. And so I just would continue to do it and I would trust him. And even at the time that I was doing it and walking into the bank to send, which by the way, don't ever do this. And if they ask you for it, this is a big, huge sign. What do you call it? Certified check? Not a certified check.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Bank check. We call them in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'd have to go in and he would give me an account number and everything to send it to. And like I said, there were always these various different accounts. Oh no, send that one to Bank of America. This one's going to Wells Fargo. So it was always different. But again, he would justify it by saying that, he was in this foreign country. And so would have to go through a third party before it could finally get to him. And that's what I did, and it was $10,000, $7,000, $5,000, blah, blah, blah. And the rope was starting to get around my neck. And I would say to him, I can't keep this up. It's not sustainable. I don't have this kind of money. Don't worry. We're almost there. It's just a little bit more. And he would say, do you want me to drop everything and fly back? And I'll be with you right now. And I'm like, no, it's okay. Just continue with your business over there. We'll meet up eventually. We would talk about when we were going to meet up and, what it was going to be like. It's all emotional manipulation. And I was easily manipulated because I was sad and lonely. And I think what I really learned, honestly, about the whole experience is it was such a wonderful distraction from my real life where I was by myself and I had this huge job that was a major, problem solving. Every single day there was some kind of an emergency involved, and it was extremely draining and exhausting and relentless. And I would have to continue to go into work every day with this, but I had this wonderful distraction and it was my lovely time. Yeah, I didn't want it ever to go away.
And of course, I completely relate to that because having been in exactly the same situation, I do understand that loneliness and that vulnerability and the need for something in your life. And when somebody's telling you what you want to hear, and what our listeners out there have to remember is these people are professional. They're skilled at this. They have scripts that they follow. They've done this plenty of times. They know how to manipulate. They know how to groom. They know how to gaslight. They know how to reel you in. So it can happen to anybody. It really can, no matter what your level of education, your status in the community, your gender, your education level, your race, religion, anything. It can happen to anyone. So I really do understand. So when did you realize that things were not right and that you had to bail out? Was it obviously after Shelley's investigation? Did it take some convincing, did it?
Well, it did take some convincing. So after Shelley, and it was Shelley, my daughter, and my daughter's best friend, and my sister-in-law, who were really the gang, and then our other two girlfriends. So they were really the team behind all of this happening. But at the point that they were coming to me and saying, hey, you have to pay attention to this. Look at what we found out. This guy is not real. And my daughter and I are like that, extremely close. And she was saying, Mom, but I was too caught up in it and I didn't want it to not be true. And this is part of the grooming and part of the whole experience is that I started to cut myself off from, these loving people. I started to not tell them details, and I started to try to keep things to myself. And that's all part of the plan on their
absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Shelley, tell us a little bit about your investigation. How did you get the team together? What did you do and what did you learn?
Yes. So the first thing I did was I hired a private investigator because we had some information from Linda. She had provided us with a photo of him. She told us where he lived, a town in California called Santa Maria. So we had little bits of information that I could feed to the private investigator, who sure enough turned it into me a 34-page report on this guy. Well, as soon as I read the report, I knew that this was not the man who my sister is interfacing with, that this man, it's his ID, sure, but it wasn't the same guy. So right away, that's such a huge red flag. At one point I said to my sister, Linda, everything I'm doing, I'm trying to locate this guy. I'm doing all this research. I'm Googling him, but I can't find anything on him. And Linda's response to me was, well, that's good. That's good. That means that he's not one of these scam artists. It was just the opposite. Because we couldn't find anything on him, we should have known better that he was a scammer. So we did so many things. We secretly recorded conversations with my sister when she would talk about him. My niece, Linda's daughter, managed to get into her email, and we found out about a bank loan that Linda was taking out that we right away were so fearful she was going to be sending this guy money from this loan. At one point, Linda's ex-sister-in-law and I went to the FBI. We went into their offices and we spoke to an agent. He was not that helpful. He was very, very sympathetic. We wanted him to get on an airplane, fly to Nigeria, go and do that internet cafe and arrest the guy. That's what we wanted. But that didn't help. So months of investigating. I spent a lot of money hiring 2 private investigators and just a lot of texting, a lot of crying with my team, the squad, as I called them. But meanwhile, Linda was shutting down. She wasn't talking to any of us. She was being so obstinate. And it was to the point where our relationship was almost non-existent. She wouldn't tell me anything. Every time I brought up the guy's name, she shut down. Especially there was a time when I said, please, let's FaceTime together. You've never FaceTimed with him? Let me be there with you. I thought that would help. And Linda responded positively. She said, okay, let me check with him and I'll set it up. Well, a few days went by. I never heard from Linda and I was psyched. It was like, yes, this is it. We're going to find out. We're going to flush this guy out. So a few days later, I texted Linda about it. I said, what did he say? When are we going to meet? She goes, this is my life. Stay out of it. Do not discuss this with me again. It was a very scary and alarming response from her, my own sister. So yes, like she says, she was groomed to, avoid family. But I will tell you the final piece of evidence that I found was one night I was ready to give up. I was done. I mean, this had been going on and I was getting nowhere. And I noticed in a photo that she had sent us of him, because she at one point sent us lots of pictures of the guy. He was wearing a t-shirt with a logo on it. It was a logo of a gym in LA because I Googled it. We called the gym in LA. Turns out the guy wearing that t-shirt worked for this gym in LA. He was the manager. And Christina, Rebecca's best friend, went on Instagram. She found a picture of the guy that my sister was in love with, standing with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the gym in LA. At that point, we knew this guy stole this poor gym manager's ID or his whole Instagram account, stole all the photos off of his Instagram account. And that was it. That's when we knew we had finally found the damning evidence that Linda could not deny. So the next day, my mom and my stepdad and I went to Linda's. We were very worried. We were very upset because we knew what was going to break her heart. But that's what happened. We went into Linda's living room. We sat down. I showed her my phone with all the pictures of the man she was in love with on another man's Instagram account. And that's when Linda finally knew.
Episode of Catfish. You're like Neve Schulman, Shelley, where you did all the investigations, and that's amazing. So, Linda, how did it feel to have your mum and stepdad and Shelley come in and put this evidence in front of you that really did prove that they were correct and that you were being scammed?
Well, that's a big question. And my response to it is, of course, in the moment when they came, first of all, when I opened my front door, it was about 4:00 in the afternoon after I'd come home from work. And when I opened the front door, my mom's husband was standing there and I'm like, oh, shit. And I said that out loud to him. I go, what the fuck are you guys doing here? Excuse my language, but I'm just telling you what I said. He goes, I know, I don't want to be here right now with your mom and your sister in the car. I go, come on in, Ron. I said, I'm drinking a glass of wine. Do you want a glass of wine? He said, yes. So we went into my kitchen and I poured him a glass of wine. I poured myself a glass of wine. And meanwhile, my mom and my sister came in and they were sitting in my living room. And my mom's husband is just the most stoic, kind, consistent, intelligent man probably that I've ever met. And consistent in that, I mean, he never involves himself in any kind of drama, or any kind of opinions. He's always been non-biased to all of us and non-judgmental. And he was in my kitchen with that glass of wine and he had tears in his eyes. He started to cry and he said, Linda, I can't imagine. I wish I could take all of this away. I wish I could make it all go away. And it was at that point that literally is what cracked the shell. It just like, I could just feel like the shell cracking and everything. And it all came out to being and all came out in the open. And I went back into the living room and that's when my sister showed me the pictures. And I knew at that right then and there. And right then and there, I blocked him on my phone. And he had been texting me the whole time I was in this meeting, but in this situation with my mom and my sister and her husband. And I just blocked it. So, and then of course I started to cry. I am not a crier. I rarely cry and I rarely show my emotions when I'm sad like that because it's really hard for me to be vulnerable in front of people. But I did. I started to cry. At the same time, though, I knew that I had been saved in just the amount of time because I did have some other money that I never said anything to him about, that I'd always kept to myself, kind of my backup. So luckily for me, I didn't lose everything. I know a lot of people have. I lost a lot. I don't make millions of dollars. I'm never going to get back the 150,000 that I did lose. But at that point in time, it wasn't so much about being scammed. It was at that point in time that I realized I was going to have to figure out how to survive this and how to come out of it without being shamed and shaming myself, much less anybody else, angry, resentful, all of the above. And most importantly, the shame. I didn't want to be ashamed and I didn't want to feel embarrassed because it is what it is. It happened, but that's easy for me to say. So it was from that point on that it took a lot for me of my own self-introspection and my own reading and work to understand that I had made an error in my life, but it didn't define who I was and what my life was. And so that's why this book is so important, because Shelley and I have included in it all the resources that she used as part of her investigation. I also included the resources that I used as part of my healing and how to get through this and survive it. Interestingly enough, the person that I was speaking with this whole time, and I did end up having a phone call about a month or two later, where he in turn confessed to everything that he did and who he was and how it all happened and everything, which was very interesting, and I left the conversation with him on that one saying, hey, you know what, whatever, I wish you the best in your life, but I want my fucking money back. And of course, I'll never get it. That was kind of another interesting tale, but I think it kind of helped me in that, sure enough, okay, this was the real deal. This guy was a scammer the whole time. I totally got scammed. And I had to also understand that I was, and it's hard to admit, I'm a prideful person, professional woman, that I was completely brainwashed. And I was shocked. Like, I never thought in a million years that I could possibly, I thought I knew everything. I was pretty intelligent. I could take care of myself and everything, but I totally got brainwashed. And interestingly enough, as continuing on the dating sites, I can recognize a scammer like that. And I get them all the time still, even though I haven't been online in a while because I'm dating somebody. But yeah, and I call them out on it too. And they are just, shocked. So to be able to use the experience, I didn't want it to define who I was. I didn't want to feel shamed by it. I feel like I want to put it out there. Hey, if this can happen to me, it can happen to you, but it's okay. You can survive it. We will be okay. And you don't have to let it ruin your life.
Yeah, as Brené Brown says, owning your story is one of the bravest things that you'll ever do. And it can be very, very healing. And I'm sure that, like me, writing the book probably was very cathartic and very healing as well. Can you just give us a little bit of an insight of who this guy was?
Sure. Well, I just want to say to you too that in our book, and I strongly believe this, Oprah Winfrey we have her quote in the beginning of the book, to turn your wounds into wisdom. And, I think that's another really important quote, and I focus on that a lot. So let's see. He was from South Africa, that he was in South Africa. His name was Prince. And that a friend of his who knew somebody basically said to him, hey, you know what? Do you want to try and do this? And this Prince, is what he told me his name was, said, I'm very intelligent. And so I said, sure. He said, because all of us here in South Africa believe that all you Americans have so much money. Who cares if we steal your money from you? We have nothing and you have everything. And so if we steal your money from you, that's just your damn fault. But that's what we're after. We want your money because, it's going to all these wonderful things, supposedly. So he told me that he actually genuinely had no idea that he had fallen in love with me throughout the whole process, that I was an angel to him, that if I ever got sick, he would give a kidney for me. It was like he just didn't expect all of that. And he explained to me, he said, let me tell you a story. There's a thief who came to your house in the middle of the night and came into your house to steal everything that he could from you, except that when he got there, the house was so comfortable. And so he sat in a chair and he was so relaxed and it felt so good that he wanted to stay, and he wanted to stay for a while. And so he did. And that was basically the story that he told me. He said that the money was turned into gold bricks and that it was going to really good causes. If that was going to make me feel any better. Right. So,
yeah, that all sounds like a complete scam as well.
Mm-hmm.
His name isn't Prince. I bet he's not in South Africa. I bet that he was all of that wanting to be in your feeling comfortable and falling for you. I think that was a last-ditch attempt to reel you back in again. And the money being turned into gold and going out to other charities or whatever doesn't sound true either, does it?
It doesn't.
No.
But it goes to show you, like what you were saying, Jules, about them having scripts, they really do. Like these people, they get together.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of them. Mm-hmm.
It's an industry. And that's what I want people to understand. This is an industry now. They are really good at what they do.
$1 billion industry.
Absolutely. And my sister-in-law, who is divorced from her husband as well, she doesn't live in the Bay Area, which is where I live. She lives outside and she's on dating sites. She meets, men all the time for a drink, for a glass of wine. What I'm trying to say is that we really believe after this experience that women in the Bay Area are targeted, because the Bay Area is known as Silicon Valley, San Francisco, that there's a lot of money here. And there's a lot of lonely, professional, single women like moi who are out there. And no matter who you are, you can listen to my words. I never thought it would happen to me. It can happen to you. So be aware of those signs. Never wanting to FaceTime, never having met, saying I love you, too soon, saying you mean everything to me, darling, honey, babe. In our case, it was king and queen. He was the king. I was the queen. That's why the book is called Her King, the Con, because he was, the con artist. So it's all of those things, talking about the future and wonderful plans. If this is what we're going to do. And, I just love you so much. And calls in the middle of the night, calls really early. They're on a whole different, timeline, international timeline. Their morning is different from our night. So sometimes they lose it on their timing. They don't, quite meet my hours. Sending texts throughout, just thinking of you, my queen. You're my queen. You're everything to me. Our future is everything to me. So continuing to feed me the sugar. Here's some more sugar. Here's some more sugar. Here's some more sugar. And it worked. And I loved it.
I can completely relate. That whole thing where they tell you that they use to try and reel you in and get you sucked into the relationship. Shelley, I wanted to ask you, when did the idea for the book come about? Was it your idea? Did you have to convince Linda to be a part of doing the book? What happened?
Yeah, so I've written several other books. And to me, this experience, I had never written about my own personal life experience, but this one screamed the need for a book. And I also thought it would really repair our sisterhood. And little did I know that, yes, I did have to convince her. She wasn't up for it at first, but that's where I want to point out something so important. And that is that my sister is the most courageous person who I know, because she finally did recognize how writing a book about this incredibly painful and embarrassing situation in her life, how it could help her heal. And it could potentially help other people too avoid this kind of experience. And on top of that, me as a family member trying to rescue her, trying to reel her in from this romance scam could help other family members and friends in the same position. Because when I was doing all of my investigating, I couldn't find anything about how to talk to Linda, how to approach her as a family member, how to convince her. What are the magic words? Somebody in the universe, please tell me the magic words to get through the brainwash. Since then, I have interviewed several psychologists and I've gotten some wonderful tips, which we include in the book so that family members will know how to talk to their loved ones who are going through this. But again, my sister didn't have to put this all out in the public domain. For her to do that, to this day, I can't believe how courageous and heroic she is, because so few people can after this. They run away, they feel shame, they hide, they don't want to even tell their own family that it happened to them, let alone the whole world in a book, and talking to you, Jules, and your audience. So I just am a great admirer of hers.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic what you've both done. And Linda, I think that the fact that you've got these extra things about how you healed, and Shelley talks about how she did the investigation and the information about how to speak to you, I think that's a vital one, because, you know, some of my friends were suspicious when I was getting in the situation where I actually went and met my scammer in person, which was so dangerous. But they didn't really have any way of trying to convince me that what I was doing was dangerous. And I was like you, Linda, I was sharing very little information, and I was really kind of keeping it all under wraps, because maybe even deep down I wasn't convinced. I don't know whether maybe I was a little bit reticent about what exactly was going on, or the fact that I was taking a risk, and certainly, you know, giving him money. And I didn't tell anyone for ages how much I lost because I was so ashamed. And I think doing the book was really super healing for me. It was very cathartic. Did you find that as well, Linda?
Well, I'm starting.
Did it really help you kind of own your story and empower you?
Yeah, I think that it's starting to get there. Like, I just didn't really know what to expect. But for example, you know, I've found out that there's quite a few people in my work who have read it. I work for a school board for a county office of education. And one of our board members just reached out to me because she had just finished it, you know? And so that kind of was like, oh my God, you know, I wasn't really expecting like the board members of my work. But at the same time, every time that I get nervous about the story and somebody reading the story makes it actually the exposure feeling of being exposed gets lessened. And what gets stronger is myself. You know, I get stronger, and it makes it even easier to talk about. And it makes it even easier to be an advocate to anybody out there, man, woman, you know, child, you know, who might be caught up in these situations. So it's interesting that you say healing, because maybe it is going to end up being super healing. I don't know, because we're just at the very kind of, it just came out, you know, the book just came out and people are just now starting to read it. What I can say is that there's been a consistent response, no matter who the person is, from family to friends to board members to other, you know, professionals. And we seem to be getting the same response from our readers, that they couldn't put the book down, that they opened it and they read it in one sitting because they just couldn't put the story down. And then, you know, of course, having the resources at the end is so helpful as well. So that's my hope. I mean, the more we can get out there, I mean, let's get these guys, you know, let's shut this industry down. That's what I say.
And the best way to shut it down is to educate people so their due diligence and don't get caught up in the scams, because we're not going to stop them at their end trying. Look, I really hope the same for you as what's happened to me. My book's been out, I think, for 3 years now. And also we did a podcast on it as well, Fool Me Twice, the podcast. And having done all of that, it was so healing just to go back over all of the messages that Truman had written me and all the Skype that we'd done. I was really able to see how he had professionally manipulated me. And that was a way that I was able to forgive myself a little bit more, because I could see what a brilliant job he had done at reeling me in. And also, I'm a teacher, so my principal read the book. Like, I got permission from my principal and my organisation to do the book, because I didn't want to be I was so worried about being judged and about people just thinking I was a complete fool and how can I be in charge of children and all that sort of thing. But like you, the response has been 100% positive. It's a universal theme. It can happen to anybody. We are doing our part in the community to help others. And I think that that's really, really amazing. Shelley, what's been the response from your end to the book?
Same thing. I just can't believe how everyone seems to get something out of it, even though this experience is not an everyday occurrence for most people in my circle. I mean, it was a completely new thing for me to go through. So reading the book, I mean, my best friend read it, and actually she helped me throughout. She really did a lot of editing for me and feedback. And she couldn't, for her to express to me how not just shocked, but how sad she was that we all went through this and that there are people out there who would do this to innocent, loving people. That's the other part of it. People just find it hard to believe that people are taking advantage like that, strangers. But overall, the response has been wonderful for the book. We've gotten some beautiful reviews on Amazon. Everybody seems to be gleaning something from it, which is really what we hope for.
That's amazing. That's so brilliant. So, Linda, how has this changed you as a person, this experience, do you think?
Well, I think one of the ways that it changed me is that I'm very proud of myself for not going down the rabbit hole of shame, and hiding away from everybody and not being able to show my face or lift my head. Like, I've worked very hard not to let this impact my sense of who I am and what my sense of self is and self-worth. It was an experience. I mean, I've always told my kids, life doesn't come on a silver platter. We make our errors. This was my error. I feel like everyone's going to have an error or two in their life. And this was my big error. And I know I say this, and it's probably not true in that I only kind of hurt myself in this because everybody had to go through a lot of pain, obviously, when I was caught up in this. So I'm very grateful and thankful that I had a squad, who cared that much about me. It's pretty amazing to find out, how much you're cared about, what people will go to, what lengths they'll go to help you. And so I think it's really important to just recognize that and honor it. At first, I wanted to be like, no, because that's going to make me, it's an acknowledgement that I did something really stupid, but it's not, it's an acknowledgement that I'm worthy of being loved. And I'm going to believe in that. Like, I got scammed, but I still know to this day that there's going to be a time when I will meet somebody who's going to love me. But I will not ever meet that person if I don't understand how to accept love, how to self-love and self-care and have self-compassion and to give myself a break. It happened. I'm here. I'm telling the story. I'm hopefully going to help other people. And at the end of the day, I survived it. So I really don't like to try to be a victim. I really try to look at it as like an opportunity. And so that's how it's changed me. It's made me be kinder to myself, which I wasn't so kind before. And to let myself know that it's okay. This bad thing happened, but I survived it and I got through it. And I think that's a really important lesson in life because we all have bad things that happen to us, but it's how we get through them and how we come out on the other side, of that. And so that's just what I'm working every single day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And once again, I can completely relate. This is so cool having this interview because I can see so many parallels and I feel so connected to you in what you went through. How are your relationships with your children and Shelley since all of this has happened?
My relationships are wonderful. It actually broke a real dam, connection was really formed after that because, again, the one thing that I really could not take was being judged, and they didn't do that. And so that made a really huge difference. And when I realized the extent to which they did and what they went through, I could only be in awe, that they had the resiliency to continue to try and get through to me and get me out of this situation. Because I was in a place where I did not know at that point how to ask for help. I knew that I was, in way too deep. But to ask for help would have meant admitting that I was wrong. And all those times I told my sister to butt out, get out of my life because this was really going to be wonderful. And he would say that, dude, just wait until they see when you and I are together and our beautiful home. And they're all going to be saying, wow, I didn't trust you that whole time. So I look at them as my heroes, my lifesavers. I have a team of angels, like a squad, and I will do the same thing for them that they did for me. And no matter what's happening in their lives, I think that it's really important in anybody in this situation. And I think that Shelly and I have had long conversations about this too, that when the person is in that situation, to be as neutral as you possibly can be, not judgmental, not accusatory. Like, can't you see this? Can't you see for yourself that you're being scammed? But to really find a way to be graceful when approaching it, because it's very difficult. Like, it was extremely difficult for me. And I was kind of being tugged on both ends by this person and by my family, like this person and my family. It was very difficult space for me to be in. I think that's really important, to try to communicate with the person in a non-judgmental way.
Shelley, what have you learned from all of this? And would you have done anything differently?
No, I think that we tackled it to the best of our abilities. And I had a full-time crazy job that just got neglected. Yet, this was such a priority. But what I learned too is that Linda is truly the strongest person I know. During her marriage, and it's detailed in the book, how she held that family on her shoulders, how they continued year after year because of her efforts. And yet she put up a wall blocking us all out again, just so far as she didn't want us to judge the failings in her world. And the same thing carried through to this romance scam. I knew how sensitive she was to me placing judgment on her and holding her accountable and pointing out the error of her ways. And so I avoided to doing that at all costs because I didn't want to alienate her any more than she already was. But I just think that we were so lucky to have finally found that piece of evidence that ended this, because if it weren't for that, I don't even want to think where we would be. But just going back, I just think Linda is such a strong person. She bears a lot of stress from her job and from this experience, but she's still standing tall. I mean, nothing seems to break her. And she's a middle child. Either. I would just say that she's really, truly an amazing person.
Oh, that's so lovely. So what now for the future for you, Linda? You mentioned that you're dating someone now. Did you meet them online?
Yes, I did. But I met him in person.
Yeah, that's the trick, isn't it? Meet somebody in person as quickly as you can and don't give anybody any money online.
No. And, don't tell people your dreams and, whatever. And he's a very, very kind person. He's a very kind man. And, we have a lot in common in that he has one son who's an adult, just like my kids are adults now. And so it's really, really nice. And, it's just interesting because, as I mentioned, I was divorced after 26 years. I didn't have tons and tons of dating experience before that, which I think also played into this whole thing as to why I found myself in the situation that I did. So I really feel a lot wiser about things and not so desperate, that there's time and that I can meet somebody. I was just so self-conscious and, really poor self-esteem when it came to meeting people, that it was easier for me to be in this situation that was unreal than it was to be in a real life situation, and actually meet somebody. I've learned a lot. I've learned a whole lot. And I know now that I can meet somebody in person and that's the most important thing to do. And it's not so overwhelming and scary and everything like that. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the resources that I put in the book that have really helped me to understand about self-love and self-compassion, because I think that's really important. And then also I'm back in school again, seeking a master's in marriage and family therapy to understand more what motivates people and also understand how to help people and kind of move into that direction. And so it's been very interesting learning about the different theories that are out there when it comes to, counseling. And I, could apply it to myself and to other people, of course. But that's helped me understand too, kind of where I was coming from and who I was. And that's also part of the healing process.
Amazing. And what about you, Shelley? What's next for you? Are you going to be doing more books in this arena or any other books?
I quit my job in order to write this book. I did.
Wow, did you?
I was the director of the Animal Film Festival. So it was a wonderful job, but I felt that this really needed to be prioritized. And so now that this book is out there in the world, I am working on another book, and I'm going to just keep being a writer.
Oh, good for you. Great. Did you self-publish or are you with a publisher?
This one was self-published because we felt that it needed to get out there as quickly as possible.
Same
to go
here.
to the publisher, it
takes 2 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I said, you know what, we're just going to self-publish. I have other books gone the traditional route. I think that this one was going fine with, if anybody is interested in self-publishing, it's really very doable and it's expensive. So here's the book.
Yeah, that's amazing. Brilliant. Her King the Con. And how can people find this book, Shelley?
They can go to Amazon. And it's also, today I checked, and it's available on my iPad at Apple Books, which is wonderful. It's a Kindle book as well. And there's a chance Linda and I will be making an audiobook of it as well, too. I used to do audiobooks as a part-time job. So we have that potential as well.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Well, listen, Linda and Shelley, thank you so much for talking to me today and for sharing your story. And I'm sure my Hong Kong Confidential listeners are just going to be so excited to hear this amazing story and to hear, Linda, how well you're doing now that you've come out of it. And it's just such a lovely twist to have the squad and the family coming in and helping you and helping drop the veil so that you could see what was really happening. That's a lovely kind of twist to the story, which makes it very unique and I think very readable. And for my listeners out there, if this is something that you're interested in, I will put the link to the book in the show notes. So it's been amazing talking to you. Like I said, it's a special interview because it's something that I've been through too. So I really do feel an incredible empathy and connection with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jules.
Thank you, Jules. It was really a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for your time today and for listening to our story. Appreciate it so much. And stay safe out there, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a gripping story. I'm excited for my listeners to hear it.
Hi Confidants, I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.